Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to present some extremely important information. In fact, I consider what I'm going to teach you today to be so essential that if I could go back in time, I would literally slap my 10-year-old self until he could recite everything back to me by heart. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you exactly what actionable steps to take to use this information to get more athletic and more dangerous. Let's get started. A lot of people come across my social media and think, oh, kettlebell aerobics. That makes sense. It's like aerobics, but with kettlebells. And while that's one way to interpret it, there is another less obvious meaning. And that is, we have the kettlebells, the power, strength, power endurance training on one hand, and on the other side, we have the pure aerobic training. Now, when you hear the term aerobics, you're probably thinking about the group class at your local gym, where the middle-aged boss bitches are trying to lose their belly fat by jumping around with the pink dumbbells. Actually, the term aerobics was coined by Kenneth Cooper, who designed a system of physical fitness for the US Air Force and is used synonymously with aerobic training. For the purpose of this discussion, the term aerobic training describes what most people mean when they say cardio. Now, I know that sounds really boring, but stick with me. I'm going to tell you now what results you can expect from incorporating this specific type of cardio into your training. One benefit you can expect is a lower resting and working heart rate. Now, why is that important? Because there is research that indicates that a lower resting heart rate is associated with a lower risk of dying, not only from cardiovascular events, but also from any cause. Now, a lower working heart rate is very desirable as well, because as you can see, the same output at a lower heart rate comes at a lower biological cost. That means that it's simply going to be easier to keep up the same pace. That leads us directly into point 2, better efficiency during exercise. The aerobic energy system is very efficient, and that means being able to rely on it more means less pain, soreness and fatigue. Benefit number 3, more endurance. That means being able to move for longer at higher speeds, and we're going to come back to this a bit later. Benefit number 4, better recovery. That means being able to recover quicker between bouts of high intensity, for example, between sets at the gym or rounds on the mat, as well as being able to recover quicker between training sessions. Last but not least, point number 5, improved health and all the associated benefits. Energy, immune function, cognition. I didn't know what video to put here, so here's a video of myself drinking water. I guess water is healthy, so it makes some sense. Now that I have convinced you that this stuff is important, let's take a closer look. Detailed discussions about physiology are beyond the scope of this video, but we need to have some cursory understanding of energy systems. Human movement is literally nothing more than muscles contracting and relaxing. That's all a muscle can do. It can contract and relax. Those contractions are fueled by a biochemical process that utilizes an energy-carrying molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It is the only energy source for all bodily functions, including movement. You can think of ATP as the currency needed to buy muscle contractions. To go along with the analogy, our bodies have a very elaborate quote-unquote financial system to make sure that ATP goes to muscle cells where it's needed, and we call those mechanisms energy systems. Now let's use myself as an example. As you can see, I'm a physical specimen, just perfectly sculpted muscle in all the right places. Now, in order for those beautiful muscles to move, energy is needed, and that energy comes in the form of ATP, and that ATP is supplied by the so-called energy systems. Too easy. There are 3 main energy systems: the ATP, CP or alactic energy system, the glycolytic or lactic energy system, and the aerobic energy system. To some degree, all of them are active at all times, just they're relative contribution varies depending on the intensity of the activity. The first one, the ATP-CP or alactic energy system, is the most powerful of the three and allows for the strongest muscular contractions, like sprinting or jumping at max effort or lifting very heavy loads. Unfortunately, it is not resistant to fatigue at all. This makes intuitive sense. No matter who you are, it is physiologically impossible to lift maximal weights many times in a row or to sprint for hours, by definition. Number 2 is the glycolytic or lactic energy system. It is less powerful than the ATP-CP one, but a little longer lasting. It becomes the main supplier of ATP after 20 to 30 seconds of all-out effort and can be sustained for around 90 to 120 seconds. Unfortunately, the process by which it generates ATP is rather messy and creates lactate and other metabolic byproducts. It's exactly those byproducts that are responsible for the burning sensation in the working muscles. As lactate accumulates, the athlete is forced to slow down and, once it reaches a certain threshold, stop moving. This makes this type of training a very unpleasant experience. Last but not least, we have the main character of today's video, the aerobic energy system. This is the preferred energy system of our body because it's the most efficient. It literally supplies energy all day and night and is very resistant to fatigue. As the name implies, it utilizes oxygen to do this, compared to the other two anaerobic systems. That process takes much longer, which is why it is the weakest of the three. It supplies energy at rest and during low-intensity activity. That sounds incredibly boring, doesn't it? Why waste time with the weakest energy system? Aren't we athletes and want to move powerfully? Not so fast. There are multiple reasons why the aerobic energy system is the one to rule them all. While the aerobic energy system is comparatively weaker than the other two, it is in reality nowhere near weak. Any exertion lasting longer than 2 minutes is going to rely on it to a significant extent. Just to give you an example, Eliud Kipchoge, one of the best marathon runners, runs a marathon in around 2 hours. That is not an easy pace at all. That's like running a 5K in under 15 minutes, but keeping that pace for the duration of a marathon. So, as we can see, the aerobic energy system is able to produce quite an impressive amount of force. Even if you're not preparing for a long endurance event, the aerobic system plays a supportive role during hard efforts. As we have established, it is much more powerful than people give it credit for. Remember that all energy systems are active at all times, so a well-developed aerobic system is going to have a larger relative contribution during hard efforts. That means less slack for the anaerobic system to pick up and therefore less of those nasty metabolic byproducts. There is a second reason aerobic training makes us better at anaerobic efforts. What you see here is a mitochondrion. Aerobic training makes the slow-twitch muscle fibers more resistant to fatigue by endowing them with more mitochondria. This is what allows trained endurance athletes to keep moving for hours and hours. Now that's great in and of itself, but there's another benefit to that adaptation. Remember that the glycolytic energy system, the one responsible for hard efforts, is relatively inefficient and creates lactate and other metabolic byproducts. And the more those build up, the more you have to slow down and the more pain you're going to find yourself in. Now this is where the mitochondria and the slow twitch fibers come into play. There's a mechanism called lactate shuttle that allows for lactate to be used to generate more ATP, which means more energy. As you can see, the lactate produced by the fast twitch muscle fibers is shuttled into the mitochondria of the slow twitch muscle fibers and recycled. This helps us in two ways. Number one, we immediately get more ATP to use. And number two, we have less lactate clogging up our system. But that's only possible if your slow twitch fibers are aerobically trained. By now, you're probably fired up to tie your running shoes and go on a 2-hour jog. But there's even more. You see, the aerobic system is responsible for recovering between hard efforts. I'm going to give you an example. Imagine an MMA fight, right? The fighters are outside, feeling each other out, testing range, then boom, there's a burst of action, like someone goes in for a takedown, they wrestle, they're up against the cage, or there's like an explosive striking exchange, and then they separate again. And during that separation, it's the aerobic system that allows one fighter to recover quicker than the other for the next anaerobic burst of action. And the same goes for in between rounds. The fighter who's better trained aerobically is going to recover much quicker. The same goes for recovery between training sessions, which is entirely aerobic. That's why athletes talk about building an aerobic base, because someone who's well trained aerobically has a better ability to tolerate a large workload of aerobic and anaerobic training. By now you have a very clear understanding of the importance of the aerobic system. Let's get into the actual practical application. First off, not any activity that gets your heart rate up is suitable for aerobic training. Choose activities like running, rocking, rowing and swimming. Any cyclical activity with unrestricted breathing and blood flow works. Now the next point is of critical importance. You have to keep it easy. As a rule of thumb, you should be able to comfortably breathe through your nose. Your average heart rate is going to be somewhere in the 120 to 150 beats per minute range. Now the correct dose is dependent on the individual. A powerlifter has very different needs than a marathon runner. But just for general health, the bare minimum is 3 30-minute sessions per week. And ideally, you want to build up over time to at least 2 to 3 hours of total aerobic volume per week. But you want to increase the volume gradually. Don't start off at 3 hours. Just take an amount you're comfortable with and increase it by about 10% week to week. When you feel tired or just worn out, decrease the volume by 50%, deload, and then start building up again. To sum it up, if you're a hybrid athlete and want to be just all around fit, you have to train all 3 energy systems, and you have to give the aerobic system the attention it deserves. Start by choosing one or multiple endurance activities and slowly but gradually increase your volume without making the mistake of going too hard. That's all I got for today, guys. Please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, just DM me over on Instagram, and I'm going to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite books. It's called Training for the Uphill Athlete. Take care, guys.